Hallelujah. Father in heaven, Yahweh Zebaot, this season of your Moedim. Oh, hallelujah. Thank you for your Ruach HaKadosh, leading your people in your Moedim with your words of Torah written on our hearts. And through every moment in Moed with you. Thank you for this opportunity to enjoy listening to the conversation that you have provided in the study of your words of Torah. Thank you for the blessings of your words of Torah written on your people's hearts. So hallelujah. Yahweh Zebaot. Hallelujah. In B'Shem Yahusha. Amen.
Amen. This is October 13th. Just so you know, the Jews, their calendar reckoning is Sukkot starts, I believe, on the 16th, 3 days from now. So even though I know some people that kept Sukkot a month and a half ago, a week ago, 2 weeks ago, there's yet this other one coming up. And just in case anybody's tuning in new, and it's like the question was asked a little bit ago, doesn't it matter the timing if he says these are the appointed times, specifically in Leviticus 23 as well as elsewhere, Deuteronomy and Numbers and Exodus, I'll speak of the Moedim. But if it's an appointed time, doesn't it matter what the calendar is? And it's like, well, yeah, it matters. Well, then why don't we all agree, have a common consensus on when the calendar is? It's like, that's just the nature of the circumstances presently, is that on the one hand, nobody really knows. And on the other hand, different people who are proclaiming themselves to be the authority over the matters, other people don't acknowledge their authority. Well, who's right and who's wrong? I don't know. Choose for yourself your own voice of authority. When I say the Jews, somebody told me once, a number of years ago, he says, every time I say the Jews, he feels this stab of insult, of disparagement. I'm not intentionally doing that. He might feel that, but that's not my intention. So I was talking to another guy the other day, and he said something about the Jews, and I said, hey, wait a minute, just so you know, when you say the phrase the Jews, and that was talking about some, let's say, eschatology. Now, that being said, the label on these talks are this Hebrew word that means futurologist. What is that? That's basically eschatology. And so this is part 5. The next hour would be part 6 of the same kind of series of thought, dealing with Psalm 70 and Psalm 71 as a scriptural reference. But this idea of eschatology is the study of the end times. You might say the things discussed in the book of Revelation. You could even look in Ezekiel, Daniel, Zechariah, Thessalonians, Matthew, specifically Matthew 24. It's like, what's going to be the signs of the end? What are some clues as to what's going on? And Yahusha talked about like the parable of the fig tree. When you see in nature, when you see the ends of the fig twigs, branches getting tender, it's like, well, boy, summer's getting close. Well, what are those signs regarding the end times? They said, well, there's going to be wars, rumors of wars, nation contending against nation. Oh, wait a minute. If there's wars and rumors of wars, what are the rumors? So I'm dealing with English words. War, well, everybody, you might think, knows what war is. Well, just to play off of that a little bit, you know what guerrilla warfare is? It's not a bunch of apes fighting. That could be guerrilla warfare. But it's like people fighting, not as in standing armies facing each other, but sneaking around in the bushes. That's commonly called guerrilla warfare. But guerra, Guerra, is the word for a militant in Spanish, or the word for war. So it's like saying warfare, warfare. It's like, what does the word mean? What are you trying to say? And the interesting thing is that, as we've discussed before, every word that you look at in English makes you think a certain thing. So, for example, I was talking to another fellow, and I said, well, if you looked at 3 Hebrew letters, Nun, Bet, and Aleph, in that order, and you say you don't know what it means, but you're just looking at what the letters are saying. As some clues, the letter Nun, if it starts with that, I draw it as a lightning bolt. Some people draw it as a sprout. Some people say it's more like a snake. Well, you could say, what's the difference? Well, what's the mathematical term? What's the lowest common denominator between all 3 of the, say, between a lightning bolt? Let's also throw in a fish jumping out of the water, a baby being born, a sprout, a little bean that puts out a little sprout of growth under the ground. You know, if your children in elementary school, I remember we did some, not really an experiment, but it's just a lesson where you take a jar and you put some paper towel and put the bean in there, so the bean's up against the glass so you can observe it, and then you put water, and then you see the bean open up and sprout, and it's like, hey, that's what's going on underneath the ground. So you learn about how nature works. But what does any of those got to do with a snake? Baby in a womb, cloudy day, whoa, a flash of lightning. It's like suddenly there's something there. Well, a snake, I've seen some photos of camouflaged markings on like a copperhead, maybe laying in the, and they'll tell you, look, there's a photograph of one of these snakes here, and you're staring at the thing. It's like, I can't see that snake. And then if they designate, it's like, oh gosh, what? Man, that camouflage is incredibly perfect. How do they do that? If the snake moves, or if somebody points at, oh, there it is. It's kind of like the flash of lightning, the baby growing in the womb until it's born. Well, if all that's noon concept, noon stuff, where there's something there, but you don't see it until it's manifest, until it's evident. I mean, it was already there, but now there's this illumination. Now there's this spark of life. There's an action happening, and so now something's, oh, there it is. Look, if that's the noon stuff, then just look at the orthography of the letter bet. And I draw it this way on purpose, rather than this square angular or the side view of a building structure, a dog house, you know, with 3 angular lines. I draw it with this spiral as if it was the very beginning of a complex spiral, or it's an embryonic shape. As an embryo develops, like a seed, basically all living creatures, they start with the female and the male, sperm and egg coming together and making what they call a zygote, single cell. And then it starts multiplying, 2, then 4, then 8, then 16. You know, it doubles, gets bigger and bigger. And then it's basically the head, the brain first starts being an identifiable form, you might say, function. And then out of the brain sprouts what will become the backbone. And then out of the backbone, the legs, the arms, and then the other organs encased in the ribs of the backbone. And that's true of all animals, fish, lizards, birds. They all have that same beginning. I draw the letter bet as this curled unfolding for that reason. It's a legitimate shape. I've seen it on ancient documents, you might say artifacts, whether it's a cave drawing, whether it's a piece of pottery with some charcoal inscription. That curled shape is a genuine shape from antiquity. It's not my own personal invention. But that shape speaks of, you might say, the common, which is to say typical beginning of a life form on the face of the earth in the universe. That's a typical thing. See, that shape to me speaks of that. If you know about the Fibonacci sequence and the golden mean spiral, which is a not a consistent tight spiral, but it opens up in a certain geometrical shape, that's also that same sort of drawing. And that's you might call it the quintessential geometric shape of the entire universe, is that what they might call the golden mean spiral. The Greek letter phi, which is a circle with a line dropped right through it, phi is the way we would spell it in English letters. Phi is the way it's pronounced, as in philosophy, which has to do with well, philo is the Greek word meaning love, like Philadelphia, brotherly love, and Sophia, the Greek word for wisdom. So philosophy is the love of wisdom, you might say. But that Greek letter phi is a symbol, a logogram that represents that golden mean ratio. It's not drawn like that. They could have drawn it like the letter bet, but I mean, who comes up with stuff? I'm just saying that there's these connections of people's consciousness all around the world talking about similar things, though they might see them from a different perspective, or at least starting from a perspective, and then they might branch out different ways. But hopefully truth is truth, and those who seek the truth, those who have a love of wisdom, end up observing the same thing, maybe from different angles, but it's the same truth. But because of your origin, you might think differently. I heard said a long time ago that if you're native, if your first language, if you were, say, brought up learning the Japanese language versus the French language versus, say, Russian or English, if you learn a second language, say everybody starts to learn Hebrew, you're going to see things differently because you think differently. Your brain processes things in a different manner. But let's just say if you're looking, people from different languages are looking Hebrew, Hebrew is what it is. But if it can be perceived from this different perspective, and somebody could say, well, which one is the most accurate? Well, they're all of equal regard. If you start off from a different vantage point, at least the idea is we're all trying to observe what's the essence and nature and character, the characteristics of Ivrit, Hebrew itself, which is what it is, regardless of who's looking at it from what perspective. And it might be that the benefit of people with a different language base is that they'll have a different way of seeing it. They might see it from, well, they say that Greek is more linear, Hebrew is more circular. They say that people say that Greek has to do with form, whereas Hebrew has to do with function. Like, here's a pencil. From a Greek mind, what is this? Well, how to describe a pencil? Well, it's a stick with a piece of lead in it, maybe an eraser. And then in Hebrew, it's like, well, it's a writing implement. Not that either of the two would disagree with each other, but that's a very simple way of saying, well, what's the difference? Somebody else might look at it and say, everybody needs to write. I can make a lot of money selling those things. So I'll find somebody who can make them pretty cheap. Somebody else might say, no, let's make a really interesting looking one, a beautiful one made out of metal instead of wood, and make it ornate. And then so they have people that they manufacture complex pens and pencils and sell them for hundreds of dollars just because people like the complexity rather than the simplicity. But what I'm saying is just, it's all how you, what is a pencil? Something to make a money off of. Yeah, okay. But then you have to make sure everybody wants to write instead of using the computer. That's a different era and all that. I'm going off on a tangent here to make a point. If you're looking at the Hebrew, because this is a study of that. What is this? Well, you got to start somewhere. And like a pattern of the letter bet, as it starts unfolding, it keeps coming back around. You could say, if I'm standing here and the spiral is growing, every time it comes around, it's coming back in my perspective, but then it leaves, then it comes back, and then it leaves, and then it comes back. And each time it comes back, it's a little bigger, it's a little different, but it's gained whatever it picked up along its passage elsewhere until it's here again. And I could say, in that same graphical motif, in that same perspective, so is my understanding of the language, even of that one letter. I could sit here and not know anything about, let's say, the letter bet, and somebody says, well, the word bet means house. Oh, okay. That's a fact to remember. The letter bet means house, or the word bet means house, and the letter bet in some manner is drawn, especially in modern, like a house. So in the modern, it's got a horizontal on the top, and then a vertical, and then a horizontal on the bottom, and the bottom one sticks out back a little bit more from the vertical. How's that a house? If you looked at the side view of, say, a simple doghouse, a roof, a back wall, a floor, there's a doghouse. And then they have this thing called a dogesh. It's a dot. If there's a dot in the middle of the letter bet, like a dog is in the house, it's pronounced with the letter B, as in bet. If there's no dot, it's pronounced as a V, or vet. So then there's a disagreement. Well, paleo didn't have any dots or dogeshes, or there's no dog in the house. So is, like the word Shabbat, Shin Bet Tav, is it Shavas, Shavos, Shavas? That's the way some people pronounce it. Or is it Shabbat? Or is it Sabbath? Well, the Tav can be pronounced as a T, a TH, or an S. S, if you look at Stone's Tanakh, they pronounce, or they write in English letters, the plural of Vav Tav as OS. So if you're thinking, well, I don't know what letter that is, it's supposed to be a T. If I put the English transliteration of the Hebrew word, it should be a T, not an S. Or that's where you get the word Beth, B-E-T-H, as in Beth El, house of God. Or is it Bet El? Or is it base? Some people write it B-E-I-S-E-L, base El, house of God. And it's like, so if somebody's trying to say, what is it? It's that. But different people pronounce it differently. Don't let it disturb you. That's just what it is. So if you hang out with certain people and say, I'm going to insist that I say Shabbat, and they're calling it Shabbos or Sabbath, are you going to intentionally conflict with them? Or are you going to yield and let your mind wrap around like the letter bet? See, this is a embryonic, it's a very organic, you might say, like a tendril of a plant, a vine in nature that just curls around, blown by the wind. And it's like, yeah, but the house has to be a solid structure. Now you have to figure out what you're going to do with that information for yourself. You can argue, you can stand against the culture, you can say, those guys are all wrong. Well, then don't listen to them. Don't hang out with them. Do your own study. But see, this is all just looking at the shape of the letter bet. You get into this stuff. What's the letter bet being a house got to do with an embryo? Where does your spirit, your soul, come from? Okay, so you've got the male and female cells coming together to form a singular zygote. And there's a spark of life. There's a flash of a noon. They say that when the two cells come together, that's the act of conception. There is a spark of light. Why? Where did that come from? Is that an incoming spirit? There's no thinking mind yet. There's a spark of life. There's no breath of life. There's no breath of life until the baby is born. But there's a spark of life. It's not consciousness. What is it? But is that like nooned into the bet? This incoming quickening? I can use different English words trying to describe the event, but you've got to imagine the event. What is it really happening? And you might come up with different English words than I do trying to describe what's happening when that zygote, that unique individual, is first becoming itself when its parents' cells join and become its self. What's happening? Well, where did the self come from? When the two physical living cells, the egg and the sperm, come together, they're still alive. So it's not like, gee, they were dead and now they're suddenly alive. But the two coming together suddenly make a self out of the combination of the two that never existed before. Where does that self come from? Well, you could say, what the, you just described it. It came from the mother and father cells joining together. Yeah, but this concept of self, where did it come from? And somebody could say, all right, I'm done with this. I'm out of here. I'm going to go watch cartoons. Go ahead. You don't have to think about this stuff. But I'm saying this for a reason, because the next letter is Aleph. And if Aleph at the beginning of the word is self-referential of I am or I will, three aspects: self-referential, I am, or perhaps I will. One is identity, and the other one is intent. That's the way I think when I look at the Aleph. But Aleph means ox. It's drawn like an ox head. Where's the cow? It's like, it's self-referential, identity, and intent. That's Aleph. Well, that's the essence of selfness. It didn't exist until the nooning, boom, something happened to this, in this bet. In the bet embryo, the bet became an embryo. Soon as the male and female, the father and mother cells joined to make one cell, that one single cell is the house, the body of the identity of the Alephness inside that one cell. And then as that one cell multiplies, the identity doesn't keep multiplying. The cellular body multiplies until it forms, in this case, a human, a man, an atom. In another case, a fish, a bird, a lizard, an animal, whatever it might be, a tree, a plant. Even the plants start with the same shape. But the self doesn't multiply. You could say, well, unless you're like schizophrenic or got multiple personality disorder. There was a book about a lady named Sybil, I believe, back in the 70s. And boy, they could map about 50 different personalities. And it's like, well, is that a demonic infestation? Is that just chemical imbalance of going berserk? Is that a fragmenting, a schisming in the brain of it's not making connections? And so that's a whole study of mental stuff. But what I'm saying is, it's generally accepted, if we understand correctly, that the self maintains a singular integrity, cohesive individuality, which, if you study the language, the way I've been looking at these things, that's represented by the letter Aleph. So if I look at the word spelled Nun Bet Aleph, I could say, well, if the Nun is the prefix and the Aleph is the suffix, then the central letter Bet is the focus of attention. But that's not necessarily all that's going on. I could look at Nun Bet as a thing, and then Aleph is a reference. And generally, as we were talking about the dictionary, the Aleph after the rest of the words is kind of an Aramaic pronounced A, like Nun Bet, A? That sounds Canadian. Yeah, but what does that mean? Or I could say Nun is the prefix and Bet Aleph is the word together. Yeah, but what does it mean? Well, I could look in the dictionary under Bet Aleph. I could look at Nun Bet. I could look at Nun Bet Aleph, and then I could stick yods and vavs in between, say the Bet Vav Aleph, Bet Yod Aleph. Those are the different mechanisms. But if I just look at this and say, what is Nun Bet Aleph, based on how I just described the contemplation of the word, I could say, well, it's essentially about the bet, which is a house. Bet means house. But see, if I look in the dictionary, I'll throw one other little wild card in. It also means to be taught, trained, and domesticated, which is to be of the house. Whose house? Any house. Remember when we were young, grade school age, there was a family at church that were Korean, and we went over to their house one time, invited us over for dinner, and it was like, please take your shoes off at the door. It's like, why? What's the matter with you people? That's what you do. Some houses, you take your shoes off at the door. Well, we don't do that. Those are the rules of the house. Okay. And if you want to argue about it, then just leave. You're not welcome in the house. See, when you step into somebody else's domain, dominion, domicile, dormitory, same root words of dwelling place, whoever's in charge there, if you're polite, if you're respectable, you just say, what's your preference that I do while I'm in your space? Take your shoes off at the door, please. Okay. I don't have to argue just because my custom might have been different. Well, whose house are we talking about here? Well, some people's house, their body, can't handle smoke, or they can't handle pollen. Say they have asthma, they can't breathe. It'll choke them up. If there's some people can't be around the scent of perfume or incense, or they won't be able to breathe. And so they might say, look, if you're around me, I mean, I've known some people so sensitive that if somebody was wearing a perfume or a cologne, they choke up. It's like, I got to get out of here. Somebody has to leave. Or it's just like, you can't have that stuff. Can't use fabric softener in the laundry even. That'll close some people up. Well, is the body the bet, or is the house the bet? Or you could say the kingdom, culture, is the bet. I could even expand that and say this universe is the bet. Well, what's on the other side of the universe? Well, the universe goes on for infinity. Or so we're told, or so we're led to believe. But if I think, well, wait a second, according to what I believe in the Bible, Elohim is infinite. Who's Elohim? Well, I can't even call him Elohim because that's giving him a definition. And if he's the infinite one that can't be contained even within a definition, then all I can say is, the incomprehensible one. I can't say one. I don't know if there's a plurality or a complexity. I could just say now I've identified it, the immaterial, incomprehensible. But I've still put a label. How do I get away from a label? Well, see, what the Jews do is they simply say the name, Ha, H-A, English letters, Ha, which is the Hebrew letter Hey, the fifth letter, Shem, and Shem means name, or it means place. It means reputation. The reputable one, but not one. Hashem, you could even say, means that place, that one, that reputation that we all know that we can't say. See, that's a lot more accurate than trying to identify the one that we can't identify. So if somebody says, I'm going to call him Hashem, out of respect, I'm not even going to try to grab the four-letter tetragrammaton, four-letter, and apply it, or call him Lord or God or whatever you want. It's like theos or the divinity, the divine, Hashem, can I call him the source? Well, see, if Aleph technically is the silent letter, and if Aleph means I am, I will, self-referential, then simply the letter Aleph is actually the best way, the most accurate way to just refer to the causal source of the entire universe. But what that would mean is that this Alephness, let's say, the Alephness, not the Aleph one, but the Alephness, the undefinable, immaterial, incomprehensible, unfathomable, somehow provides let's say, a smaller space than itself, which is the universe, which from the perspective of something in the universe is an infinite, even if it's expanding the way we're told, it still is with expanding within a bigger expanse. Well, what if you don't choose to put your brain there? Hey, there's some interesting cartoons playing. Go watch that. Bye. If you take this idea and just entertain it for a moment, there's this phrase I saw written called Zim-Zum, Z-I-M-Z-U-M, or for the Canadians, Z-I-M-Z-U-M. Eh? Just joking around. I'm not trying to be insulting, just so you know. But it's that space that is the existing reality that nobody can define, which the a-ness sticks you might say reaches in and makes a void, which you can then stick into the void a spark of being. That's called Zim-Zum. And yet that's described in Kabbalist writings, or so I've heard. And then somebody else said, you're invoking the Kabbalist. That's it. You're out of here, scoundrel. It's like, no. What I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to grab a label that somebody else has already invented and sticking it on a concept which is rather outside the normal frame of reference. And I don't know the particulars of Zim-Zum, and I have never studied the Kabbalah stuff to tell you exactly what they think it is. And maybe it's disturbing of me to even mention that phrase. I know it's disturbing to some to hear that, but I'm saying somebody else has already thought of this, and somebody else has already tried to give it definition. And what it is, well, I could liken it to the letter Kuf. Figure there's nothingness. It's all the Alephness. And say the Alephness decides to make a bet. How does he do that? The letter Kuf is our English letter Q, is a circle with a line. Okay, figure just a circle. How big is the circle? Figure the circle is just a dot. It exists or it doesn't exist. So if you have the Alephness with nothing, no material object existing, because this is going back in the very beginning before creation, nothing exists as a material object or space that the object can inhabit. There's nothing. Well, in this Alephness, a dot, a single dot of being is invented. So the Alephness invents the way to put something within something else, and it never existed ever before. Can you picture that? Can you wrap your mind, if not reasonably, can you picture it artistically? Can you picture it poetically? use all your capacity to simply imagine no material object or space, beingness, doesn't exist yet. Only the Alephness exists. And we don't even know how to define that because it's infinite in all directions of time, of location, of consciousness. It's this infinite Alephness. Within that infinite Alephness, the Alephness itself creates an otherness of its totality, which is a individual distinction other than itself. The concept of other. Why would it do that? It invents it, it made it, so it's not other, it's part of it. But somehow the Alephness had to invent a distinction between itself and this thing we'll just call the otherness. And the otherness has an aspect of identifiability, which is to say, an object, whereas the Alephness was, let's say, for lack of better reference, spiritness, without bodiness. So the Alephness, spiritness without bodiness creates or invents this thing, which is identifiable now as an object with essence of substance. Well, that's bet. Other. And because it's now an object, that point can be inflated. Well, it might inflate because it's given the ability to expand, or it might inflate because the perceiver just gets closer. Either way, if that betness inflates, is it solid? Can it be hollowed out? If the betness itself expands and is still solid, it's still of its own integrity with nothing else. If you hollow out the bet now is copying somehow the essence of the Alephness, because the Alephness was, let's just say, all one, all unified, and then the bet was placed as a different thing within it. So for the bet to be expanded and a hollowness put inside the bet is for the bet to copy the essence of the Alephness, and then to stick something else inside the hollowness of the bet, which itself can expand, and some other thing put inside it. Well, that's just more Alephhness, because if the first thing that the Alephhness ever did is create this otherness, different than itself, but still a model of itself, in that the act of, and I'm repeating what I just said, the act of there being nothing but the self, the Alephhness self, however complex in all directions, hyperdimensional, because there's no such thing even as a dimension, there's no such thing as time. But going back to the very beginning, if the Alephnness can stick another singular, minuscule dotness of otherness, well, that's the same thing that bet's going to do, and that's the same thing the thing within the bet's going to do, and the same thing with the thing within that's going to do, because it's now established a routine. Aleph is established a routine of its own doing. And within our understanding of this Alephnness, nothing was ever done before, because it's so vast of everything, there's nothing to do. So the fact that it would make a betness within its realm of Alephnness is an act of doing, and perhaps even the first act of any doing. But that means if the bet's going to do something, it can do the same thing, copying the Alephnness which generated it. So picture this: if the dot of the betness expands and is hollowed out within the infinite Alephnness, but the bet is given a sense of infinity to anything within it, just like the bet within the aleph seems infinite and who knows whatever, but I'm just saying these concepts, well, that's the physical universe. And the dot put within the bet universe is, let's call it planet Earth. And then as planet Earth expands, you could say, well, there's things put not necessarily in it, but on it. And those are the creatures that start out in an embryonic bet spiral shape. And then the embryonic spiral shape is given a consciousness, a selfness, an alephness, and it expands, learning and thinking and becoming. And then when it procreates, the female has another entity put within it. See, it's just this fractal pattern developing. How does that work? Well, how did it work in the very beginning? Well, the aleph just decided to make the bet. How did the bet get there? Just put it there. Was there a mother and a father? To make the physical universe? Well, we don't know. It was the alephness. We don't know. If the alephness was of a singularity, then there was no duality, father and mother, unless it was both. But either way, we're now trying to plug the unknown immaterial into our conscious mind, which by definition is out of bounds. We can't do that. All we know is that the alephness, apparently, because here we are, that we exist, the alephness, by obvious within appearing, made a universe and put the, let's just call it the planet Eretz, Earth, in the universe, and everything else is upon it. And everything else was designed to have two, male and female, father and mother, to make it happen. Seeds pollinate, male and female, animals, fish, birds. But there's some single cell microorganisms where you'll have one and they go through this thing called mitosis where they just split in half and now there's two. It didn't need a father and mother to be there. So there's a model of a singular becoming a, call it a binary. Why is that? Well, that's, I can imagine, kind of like the aleph splitting off itself, and now there's two, so now one of them's a bet, but which one? Well, this one split into that one. No, you don't know, because if it splits in half, you can't tell which is which. Which is the first and which is the second? Well, they're indistinguishable, other than the fact, because they're identical, if they had a consciousness, if they had a means to perceive, the difference, if they're two are identical, same thoughts, same heart, same being, when it was one, the singular consciousness within the alephness had a perception of everything. I'm looking, because I have an eyeball in front of my head and it looks this way and that way. But see, what if my whole head was an eyeball? What if it had no specific location inhibition? What if my whole being was an eyeball? Or I had 7 eyes or filled with eyes like the creatures in Ezekiel around the throne? What does that mean? That means it can look everywhere all at the same time? Not restricted or limited to a cycloptic or 2 eyeballs or eyeballs in the side of the head. If you're a herbivore, and carnivores have the eyeballs in the front, and it's like, well, we're restricted, we're limited. But what if this alephness had no restriction? If the alephness has no restriction, but then there's a mitosis event where the singular aleph, let's say, turns into a second just like it, you see, it no longer has the same experience, because now the one on this side can see everything, but there's this other guy here. And this one can see everything, but it can see this guy here. So suddenly, they're different. If I model it to my Adamic design, well, one has a block or a reference of another being to its right and the other one to its left, but there's no right and left. but there's a difference in its essence because now the oneness, the alephness, has a consciousness about the other being the other to its alephness, but the other has a reference of differentness, that guy being the alephness. So now not only are they, yeah, but if you can't tell the difference between the aleph and the bet because they're identical, well, they're really not identical. Somehow, in the essence, they're not identical. Because while it was the oneness, it had the desire, the intention, it created within itself its ability to become this otherness also. But now I have to try to wrap my mind in what was the alephness doing before it ever created anything other than its own alephness. It's all conjecture, it's all hypothetical. But if I could say then, let's say the primary alephness retained its primariness, then when it would make a secondary mitosis event of its own alephness, the second one would carry an other playing second to the first. It even though it's identical, it decided to keep a primary, secondary, first order, a following order. How do I know it did that? I don't know. I'm just using some kind of sort of a logic here where one has reference of the other. And then well, that's just a model of a single cell microorganism procreating itself compared to the typical bet shape where you have the mother and father cells making another being, a baby. Well, there's two models in existence in the universe. Should I assume that I can take the model that I observe and construe a causal reality? I could assume that. Why not? What the heck? I mean, we're here. We're in this environment, and we're just looking around and trying to say, well, what if the alephness, the causal agent, built this place so it could be diagnosed, it could be investigated and analyzed, and then presumptions made as to why it looks like this, or how does it look like this? What's it trying to, does it say something because it looks like this? All that's conjecture. For scientists to say, oh, this looks like this, there must be a reason. A reason? Well, then that jumps immediately from science into philosophy and religion. So that book, Why Does the World Exist, by Jim Hall, I'm not going to address religion, but I'm going to look at philosophy and science and try to figure out, why does the world exist? There doesn't have to be a why, but there's obviously, if you think about it, there is a why. Why does this universe even exist? So for me, talking about the alephness and the betness and jumping into all these things is to say, go back to that letter Kuf, our letter Q. If the alephness in the void of nothingness puts a dot, expands the dot, and then sticks something inside the dot, how is that the letter Q, the letter Kuf? Because the letter Kuf is drawn as a round thing with a line poked into it. The bottom, in English, the letter Q is a little squiggly line off to the side. That just happens to look like a model of the conception event, the uterus and the sperm cell. Looks like the letter Q, looks like the Kuf, looks like the model of the Zim-Zum. What is that saying? Well, where did that come from? If there's no father and mother, if there's a type of event like the single cell organism, mitosis forming another, where'd the other go if there's no such thing as space? Well, there had to be a space, and there had to be this concept of the otherness. entering into that space of being. If the space is actually being and not space like we think of 3 dimensions, if it's the concept of being. So what I'm saying is that if you let your mind go here, you've now apprehended a koofness. Sometimes the letter koof is drawn as a straight line with a circle in it. And they say, well, that's like the sun on the horizon. If it's a full circle with a line in it, you can see the sun below the horizon and the sun above the horizon, half and half. Sometimes they'll just draw it as a straight line and half a circle on top. Or you could take that same circle and draw the line vertical, like the Greek letter phi. It's all the same symbol. Whether you have a circle with a little squiggle coming out of it, or a circle with a vertical line, or a circle with a horizontal line, if you understand the koofness, that's what that is. And it's like, the koof is way down at the end of the alphabet, and I'm sitting here trying to describe it as what's happening at the aleph and the bet. How's that possible? How it's possible means that back when the aleph and the bet was becoming the happening thing, and if it's modeled by the koofness, then the concept of what it was going to do, captured by the orthography of the koof, might have been predetermined. In other words, if the alephess, before it did the betness thing, thought of this whole string of action that we look at now and observe as the 22-letter aleph bet, and it decided that this letter kuf was going to be the original event, but also some event back here, but also just a way of expressing what happened, it had to think of that before it did it. And I can choose to pull it back into English words and say, in the mind of Aleph, it predetermined this whole alphabetic sequence, fixed it, located it, made it a reality, and then caused it to happen. How did it cause it to happen? Well, you look back in Genesis and it spoke. The alephess spoke, thus creating the betness. But see, if you read in Genesis 1, that's not exactly what happened. It said everything was formless and void, darkness on the face of the deep. And then the alephess spoke and said, Yehi Or, by Yehi Or. It said Yehi Or, and Yehi Or is what happened. See, as soon as you put that in English, that didn't happen. If he said Yehi Or, if he said, let there be light, and there was light. You see, that's a third person narrator reference. Let there be is what he said. Okay, I'm telling you what he said. And there was, now I'm telling you what happened, like some kind of journalist. But that's not what it says in Hebrew. In Hebrew, it says Yehi Or. That's Yehi is exist, and the word Or, Aleph Vav Resh, is light. So exist light. And that's the Vav, it's connected with Yehi Or, which is exist light, or the existence of light. So I could say that what happened is that he said, because it says in Hebrew, Vayomer, Vav Aleph Yod Aleph Mem Resh. Yod, that's a causal action of the hand. Yod, then Aleph Mem Resh is to declare, to speak, an utterance, Yehi Or. Yeah, but see, the alephess first had to invent that he could speak. Words didn't exist. Speaking didn't exist. Did he have a mouth? There's no mouth. His alephess. He had to think all this stuff up. So if this alephess invented a way that out of nothing else, there's an otherness, even if it's a type of mitosis, without father and mother, but it's the same thing, that now there's, where there was nothing, now there's something, and now the something has something else within it. That's how the universe began, according to looking at the Hebrew letters, according to looking at the script. Where's the Big Bang? Well, I could say, just in reference, the fact that there's an alephess of nothing and suddenly there's a dot. think of the dot in its smallest capacity, without size, but simply essence of being, compared to there being a singularity, and now there's suddenly another, that itself is a big bang of huge proportions, even though there's no space, there's no explosion. It's a conception, which is a big bang because of its distinction from what existed before, otherwise. For me to say Big Bang in English, whoa, I have to think of an explosion, and I have to think of the universe sending stars out into infinity and galaxies and all this other stuff. It's like, I choose to think of that. That doesn't mean what it was, but the Big Bang, as some scientists labeled that, could be simply, what does it mean to exist if there's no existence? There was certainly an alephness, because that's the status or the state, no matter what it's defined as being, before there's a bet. Suddenly there's a bet. Well, isn't that a virgin birth? See, if I can describe all this in other terms and say that's a model of the virgin birth. What? How can there be a virgin? Ooh, we just discussed that. There could be mitosis. It could be somehow two becoming one, but the first event is still from the alephness. Now there's a betness. If that can be a model of Genesis 1, it's also a model of the virgin birth. They're the same thing. Why would that be impossible? Why would that be incredible, uncredible, without credence? You see, it's only our personal willingness to imagine it. Could and would the alephness place the squiggle inside the circle of the letter Kuf, the letter Q, just because he wanted to, of the alephness's own determination? Sure. Does the alephness have to follow a protocol of two becoming a third, the male and female becoming a zygote? He invented that too. He doesn't have to follow that protocol. He can do the mitosis protocol. He can do whatever he wants. It can do so. It could then the aleph do a virgin birth? Why not? I don't have to take my mind and place it as the cop, the policeman, hey, you're allowed to do that and you can't do that. I'm the judge. I'm the referee with the black and white striped shirt. What's going on here? I'll tell you what's going on here. I don't know nothing. Could the alephness do a kuf zimzumness virgin birth? Why not? Well, then you look at string theory. What's string theory? Quantum physics. Whoa, nobody really knows. Well, it's just messing around. It's observing and trying to draw conclusions, conjecture. So they say, the scientists say that here's a piece of paper. Where's the piece of paper coming from? Well, it's a tree that's been ground up and pulverized. Okay. What's a tree composed of? Well, all living forms are composed of CHON, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen. What are those composed of? Oh, well, varying numbers of electrons around neutron. You reduce that down. What's the difference between a proton and an electron? In my understanding, one's a positive charge and what's a negative charge? A charge of what? An electrical or a electromagnetic or magnetism, a polarity, but of what? Of the same thing, two opposite polarities of the same energy. We might draw it in a two-dimensional reference as like a sine wave, a wiggle, a squiggle. And somebody else I saw had a video, they said, well, if you look at a squiggle, it's the same thing as if you took that squiggle and turned it on end. Now it's a circle. And it's like, I've asked the question before, just wondering, it's like, what is it that makes a oscillation? What is it, if something's going in this direction, what force pushes it down? And then what other force pushes it back up? And then this one pushes it back down so that it oscillates like this. And this guy was saying it's a matter of perspective. If you're looking at it this way and you're trying to draw it two-dimensionally, it looks like this oscillation. But if you take that same movement trajectory and look at it on end, it's a circle. Well, then there is no force. That was, I'm trying to wonder what makes this force, but there is no force. Okay, what binds or holds, let's call it a particle, into the spin instead of, or, centripetal force throwing it out? It must be built into the nature of the thing to just have this spin. What holds it into that form? The aleiphness gave it that ability, that essence, that restriction. Yeah, but see, if I go to the next verse of Genesis 1, and it says, the Ruach Elohim merechefet al pnei tahom, or on pnei hamayim. I have to go back and look. But the point is, the word merechefet is translated in the dictionary as flutter, vibrate. I'm trying to see what time it is. We're right at about an hour, aren't we? 102. Let me know if, I don't know if Carla's still here. But anyway, the point is, if that word merechefet means to flutter, to vibrate, to hover, to quiver, well, that's generating oscillations, at least this way. What about that way? The Ruach of Elohim is the thing which controls the trajectory, the pattern, the direction, the containment versus the expanding, the Ruach of Elohim. Okay, so before something is made that just has no limit, no bounds, no containment, the Ruach of Elohim is that which causes the oscillation, the pressure to turn back around or to retain within this spiraling. Well, to retain a shape is the same thing as the womb retaining the zygote, the embryo, or the same thing as the universe containing all the living things on the earth, the same as the body containing the self. It's the Ruach of Elohim which gives everything then its form, function, environment, and duration. Well, if I look at the word Ruach in the dictionary, it's breath, it's spirit, but it's also mind, it's also will. It says it's the word courage, and it's like, well, that's just an attitude. A courage is what you have that makes you. Courage is, you might say, that which I have taken as my limit of what I'm going to do. Am I courageous enough? Do I need more courage? Why would courage be one of the definitions of Ruach? But it also says Ruach is an expanse. An expanse? If I want to open the window, that's Ruach, or I'm increasing the Ruach of this room. If I knock down this wall and push it out 3 feet and build another wall, I've increased the Ruach of this room. To give air or to ventilate is also Ruach. It's also, if I'm going to go on a journey from here to there, the expanse of here to there is the Ruach of that journey. So I can look back at this alphabet and say the distance between Aleph and Tav is the Ruach. The distance between Aleph and Bet is the Ruach, the spirit, the mind, the Ruach of Elohim. For the Alephhness to determine what it's going to do, how it's going to do it, what's going to be the nature of it, is all the Ruach. The Ruach HaKadosh is the Kadosh. Well, what's Kadosh mean? It's translated holy, set apart, sacred, sanctified, betrothed, like no other. It's the what's Kadosh mean? Well, there's a clue in that the 3 angels around the 4 angels around the throne say Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. They say the word Kadosh 3 times, as if there's no greater word to describe what they're beholding of the one on the throne. Let's say it's the Alephhness in a, what does it mean to be on a throne? Is there a humanoid entity sitting, a posture on a chair, a place. Well, back in that book I had recommended as a possible, what do you mean by recommend? Guide for the Perplexed, written by, I believe it was Maimonides, translated into English. He was saying, listen, when it says he's sitting on a throne, there's no chair. He's not sitting with a physical body. There's this concept of the word to sit means he's not being pushed away and dislodged. It remains. The word for throne is used as a designation of rulership, ownership, dominion. There's no chair. To say he sits on a throne, that's the Greek. The pencil is yellow with a red eraser and a piece of charcoal colored lead. It's not about that. It's about it writes. To say that there's Elohim sitting on a throne, he rules and will not be ever dislodged by some usurper. Yep, see, if I'm reading in English, dadgummit, Ezekiel saw a man-sized type figure sitting in a chair in the heavens. Okay, you can believe that if you want, but I'm just saying that that's not necessarily what it means. If I could say the Ruach of Elohim is what the Alephness determined, whatever that is, and somehow, if the Alephness determined these 22 letters and fixed them into position, what we see, what we have, what we're given to behold is the Amad, the Ayin Mem Dalet, like standing columns. What holds them into the position is the invisible, that's the Yesod. The Amad Basodi, Jeremiah 23. What did Yahuwah say? What did he articulate? What did he pronounce? It's translated 3 different ways. The evident is the Amad, the invisible is the sod. Kind of like the drawing on the kuf of the billowing smoke, like it's hard to see and I don't know what's going on. It's cloudy. That's like the question mark, the wham, the flaming exclamation point. Amad Basodi, pillar of fire, pillar of smoke. Abraham cut the animals in half and put them aside, thrown into some sort of stupor of incoherence, hallucinogenic, whatever that was, and he sees passing through like a billowing furnace and a flaming torch. Is that one thing with 2 aspects, or is that 2 different things? It's a picture of the pillar of fire, pillar of smoke, the Amad Basodi. See, it's all how I can allow myself to picture or imagine what he made. Well, if there's this billowing unknown, like a smoky question mark, and then there's a lightning bolt, hey, there's the virgin birth again. There's Genesis 1, Yehi-or, bam, big bang. There's the everything is Aleph, and suddenly there's Bet. It's all the same event. The electron and proton of the physics investigation, well, what makes that? Well, then they say, well, the electron is composed of quarks, other things composed of other things, composed of other things, which are quarks. So just to reduce down, what's a quark? Well, it's composed of a wiggling string of massless information. But an electron, it's a spark of energy. There is no mass. But that electron flying around a proton becomes an element which makes up things that we designate have mass, object, beingness, the houseness, the betness. Betness is composed of the ruach of the alephhness. Nothing else. The mind of the aleph contained as the ruach of Elohim, as the aleph bet, creates or causes or somehow builds the betness of all that exists as matter. And for him to be able to speak and cause life, or to speak and cause light, or being, or essence, or an object within a space, is the virgin birth. But it's tapping into an order of things beyond our limitations, as I might conceive it, of it needs a father and a mother. Well, what was the father? The living sperm, snake-like nooning in the bet, if that's the environment, oh, that's the mother. So Nun Bet is the father-mother picture causing the Aleph to exist. The Aleph then is the product of the other two, which is the self, which then, we'll see an Aleph is drawn as an arrowhead, ox head, arrowhead, but an arrow doesn't make itself. An arrow is made by the archer. The archer says, I'm going to do something. I'm going to make a device, a bow with an arrow, or a rifle with a bullet, and I'm going to determine a target, and I'm going to aim this at that, and I'm going to put fletchings on the arrow and make the stick straight, the shaft of it, so it flies straight and get a certain amount of, all this stuff is designed just to take this projectile and make it hit the target as desired. Why would you do all that? Just for the fun of doing it. Or maybe you're hunting and you want dinner, but it's just for the fun of doing it. Maybe there's another reason, but we don't know. So if I looked at Nun Bet Aleph, I'm inventing that there's a tav, a purpose, a reason, a target. How far away is the target? Well, it could be right next to it, or it could be way out there. So if I'm going to analyze the word spelled Nun Bet Aleph, what does it mean? That means everything was designed to set up something else. But see, right in the beginning of the book of Revelations, it says, this is the prophecy. It's like, whoa, is it a prophecy? Was it a dream? Was it a vision? Was it? Nobody knows what it's a Nun Bet Aleph. See, as soon as I say the word prophecy, the English word, and it is entrapped, it's burdened by all my understanding of the word prophet or prophecy, fortune telling, future telling, futurologist with English, religious and philosophical and scientific shroud just wrapped up in binding. What did Yeshua say when Lazarus came out of the grave? Unbind him. But Lord, he stinketh. Unbind him. Isaiah 58. Release the shackles of oppression and bondage of what's trapping your mind, what's trapping your ability to perceive the reality of the Alephness. Take off the Greek. How do you do that? Take off the Roman. Take off the English. Go back to Nun Bet Aleph. Put your mind into that space. Then you'll see what's going on. And it's all in these letters. I was talking to a guy, he said, man, I spent 2 weeks just looking at 2 words. Something's wrong. I should be able to get, no. You're doing it exactly right. That's what it takes. Maybe 2 months, maybe 2 years looking at 2 words. You're on the right track. To think you should have done it in a couple hours, that's the wrong track. Well, you could look at something and get something out of it in the short order. But if you took 2 weeks to look at 2 words, well done. With that, I got to take a break. I'm going to hit stop record.